They say all good things must come to an end. Rebecca, for her help, constant encouragement in those early years, I really couldn't have done it without her.
Nobody expected Drew Pritchard to walk into a quiet auction room in 2024 and start unloading the very pieces that built his entire identity. More than 620 items, rare lamps, fairground boats, industrial treasures, even things he once called old friends, went under the hammer for over £800,000. But the money wasn't the shocking part. What stunned everyone was the silence in his face. It didn't look like business. It looked like a man letting go of everything he'd spent 3 decades holding together. Because behind those antiques were years of cracks. The affair that blew up his marriage, the pub watch ban that embarrassed him in his own hometown, the shop he closed without warning, and the fame he walked away from after 200 episodes. And when his divorce settlement forced him to part with millions in shared assets, the pressure only grew heavier. Fans called it heartbreaking. Critics said it was karma, and the people who grew up around him just shook their heads and said, "We saw this coming." So the real question is not why he sold his collection. It's what happened to Drew Pritchard before he reached that auction room, what broke, what he hid, and what finally pushed him to sell the life he once fought so hard to build. And the truth behind that fall is far more emotional and far more complicated than anyone realized. Stay with me till the end, because the final detail is the most shocking. Drew Pritchard didn't grow up anywhere near the world of stately homes or million-pound antiques. He grew up in Conwy, a small Welsh town where winters felt endless and money never stretched far enough. His parents ran a corner shop that barely kept the lights on, and most nights ended with quiet calculations at the kitchen table about which bills they could delay without losing everything. But even as a kid, Drew looked at the world differently. While other children swapped football stickers, he hunted through skips, scrap yards, and flea markets like he was following a map only he could see. By 8 years old, he had already filled the house with bottle caps, rusted hinges, old tins, and whatever else he could drag home before his mom caught him at the door. Neighbors thought he was odd. Teachers thought he was distracted. But Drew was already training his eye, long before he even knew that skill would one day make him famous. A lot of it came from his grandfather, a World War II veteran who told him stories about forgotten bunkers, abandoned belongings, and the history ordinary people left behind. Those stories lit a spark. Drew started sneaking into old slate yards and derelict sheds, convinced that something valuable was always hiding under the dust. Sometimes he got lucky, sometimes he got hurt, but the risk never stopped him. By 12, he had already sold enough small finds at weekend markets to put a bit of money in his pocket, a miracle in a home where every pound mattered. And even though he struggled in school and teachers mistook his dyslexia for laziness, the places he explored after class taught him more than any lesson ever could. Because while everyone around him saw a boy messing with rubbish, Drew was quietly learning the first rule that would define his entire life: nothing is worthless if you understand its story. And the moment that lesson clicked, everything else started falling into place fast. By the time Drew hit his mid-teens, he wasn't just exploring abandoned yards anymore, he was working inside them. At 15, he landed a part-time job at a small car restoration garage in Llandudno. It paid barely anything, but the place was a goldmine of knowledge. Welders hissing, engines half alive on metal stands, the smell of oil soaked into every wall. This was where he learned how machinery aged, how metal failed, and how something broken could come back to life if you understood its bones. The job wasn't glamorous. He spent long days sweeping up filings, stripping old parts, and burning his hands on metal he thought had cooled. One welding slip left a scar across his palm that he still carries today. But pain didn't slow him down. If anything, it hardened him. Every mistake became another skill, another instinct he would use years later when he started picking through the ruins of factories and old churches. Then came the first real warning that the antique world has a dark side. The garage wasn't as honest as it looked. Drew didn't know it at the time, but some of the classic parts he handled had been stolen. When the police raided the place in the late 80s, everything stopped. Officers hauled away crates of gear, questioned the staff, and seized more than he could count. Drew wasn't charged, he was just a kid. But that day taught him something the hard way. In this line of work, not everything that glitters comes from a clean source. He walked away from the garage and poured everything into his own small flips. The first real win was a battered 1920 oak chair he found rotting in someone's outbuilding. He scraped it, repaired the joints, polished the wood, and sold it for more than he'd made in weeks at the garage. Then came a Victorian gas lamp he dug out of a junk pile. Another profit, another confirmation that he wasn't imagining his eye for value. By 17, he had already saved enough to buy proper tools. By 18, he had made more from weekend deals than from any job he had tried. And even the failures pushed him forward, like the time an entire batch of French ceramics arrived smashed. Most people would have thrown the pieces away. Drew turned them into mosaic art and sold the lot. He was learning fast. This world rewards the brave, ignores the timid, and destroys the careless. And Drew was determined never to be the one who got destroyed next. By his early 20s, Drew wasn't dreaming anymore, he was acting. In 1993, at just 23 years old, he opened his first small antiques shop in Conwy with nothing but a modest bank loan and the confidence he'd built from years of picking through forgotten places. There was no grand launch, no wealthy clients waiting at the door. It was just a cramped room filled with old beams, stained glass, reclaimed church furniture, and whatever else he could rescue before it was lost forever. To keep the shop alive, he threw himself into the demolition world. Whenever an old pub, chapel, hotel, or Victorian factory was marked for destruction, Drew was there before sunrise, climbing over rubble and slipping into buildings that looked like they were held together by dust. He bought what no one else understood, hauled out what others thought was worthless, and rebuilt value piece by piece. One week, he'd be stripping cast iron radiators from a shuttered mill. The next, he'd be pulling stained glass from a collapsing church moments before the roof gave way. The risks were constant. One demolition crew uncovered a live World War II bomb while Drew was there scouting materials. Another site nearly cost him everything when thieves broke into his shop that same year, stealing prized items he'd spent months finding. Insurance barely covered half of it, and for a moment, the business he'd fought for seemed like it might die before it grew. But he pushed harder. Every sale strengthened his reputation among designers in London who wanted authenticity, not replicas. Every near miss toughened him. Every successful flip proved the world was finally seeing what he had seen since childhood, the hidden value inside forgotten things. By the late 90s, he was no longer just a local picker with a tiny shop. He had become the person demolition crews called before they smashed through walls. He was moving more stock, handling bigger orders, and quietly building the foundation that would one day turn him into a TV personality. And yet, Drew didn't know that the next phase of his career wouldn't just grow his business, it would change his face, his voice, and his reputation in homes across the world. By 2011, Drew's life took a turn he never planned for. A TV crew followed him on one of his buying trips, and what they captured, the charm, the blunt honesty, the instinctive eye, turned into the pilot of Salvage Hunters. Overnight, he went from an obscure Welsh dealer to the face of a brand new genre, part road trip, part history lesson, part raw negotiation theater. The first episodes were simple. Drew driving across the UK with a van full of dust, walking into forgotten estates, barns, workshops, and private collections. But viewers were hooked. They were not watching just to see old furniture, they were watching him. His confidence in spotting value, his fast decisions, the way he could flip a battered urn or Victorian light into a payday, it was addictive. Within months, the show became one of the most watched programs on the network, but fame came wrapped in danger. Many of the places Drew filmed in were barely standing. In Scotland, he salvaged heavy cast iron urns in a storm that nearly destroyed them mid-shoot. In Cambridge, he and John T. pulled a 1920 motorcycle from a warehouse so unsafe that filming had to stop until the structure was checked. In Belgium, he bought a Tiffany-style lamp tied to a decades-old scandal, then nearly got stuck in a paperwork nightmare trying to get it home. Germany brought tense negotiations over a clock worth more than he expected. Hungary added the shock of a fake piece that cost him money and pride. The world saw the confident haggler on screen. They didn't see the nights he and the crew slept in freezing vans, the insurance battles over damaged finds, or the warehouses full of unpredictable stock. They didn't see that every episode was a gamble. One wrong purchase could erase the profit from 3 successful ones. As the show grew, so did his reach. Buyers from Europe, America, and high-end designers started calling. His shop transformed from a local stop to a destination. Celebrities visited, orders surged, and Drew became a household name, synonymous with British salvage culture. But the fame came with a price. People started developing strong opinions, some admiring, some deeply negative, and those opinions would eventually shape the public image that followed him into every deal, every negotiation, and every mistake. Because behind the polished episodes and the big sales, something else was happening off camera, and it was about to reshape his entire personal life. Long before the scandals and headlines, Drew built something that looked almost storybook perfect. In the late 90s, he met Rebecca, a sharp, ambitious woman working in real estate. They connected instantly, same drive, same curiosity, same taste for old things with soul. Within a year, they were married, not because of pressure or rushing, but because the partnership felt powerful. Together, they bought a forgotten 19th century chapel in Conwy for a price that seems unbelievable now. Most people saw a crumbling building. Drew saw potential. Rebecca saw a home, and they turned it into one. Their son Tom arrived in 1999, followed by their daughter Grace a few years later. While other kids grew up with plastic toys, the Pritchard children learned to tell oak from ash, Victorian from Georgian, and silver from plated metal. Tom could identify a fake by age 5. Grace played among antique fabrics older than most of the neighbors. It wasn't a normal household, but it was theirs. Rebecca wasn't just his partner at home. She quickly became the quiet engine behind the business. She had left a well-paid fashion career abroad, a job that most people would cling to for life, to join Drew in the trade full-time. And she was good, really good. Her eye for proportion, color, and authenticity helped transform the business into something more polished, more profitable, more respected. A single valuation of hers could turn a 300-pound sofa into a 3,000-pound sale. She saved them thousands every year doing in-house restoration work. She made decisions that doubled profits. She kept the business stable when renovations pushed them to the financial edge. Together, they worked like a pair of gears, different shapes, different strengths, but perfect when they turned in the same direction. Even family holidays weren't just holidays. They were sourcing trips across Europe. They had load the children into the van, drive through Italy, France, Belgium, and come home with a van full of discoveries that could flip into 5-figure returns. It became a rhythm: family, travel, antiques, repeat. But behind the beautifully restored chapel and the successful shop, there were cracks most viewers never saw. Running a business together is hard. Raising children while one partner spends weeks on the road is even harder. By the early 2010s, the show's success meant Drew was away more than ever, hundreds of miles from home, filming late nights, negotiating early mornings, chasing pieces across borders. Rebecca stayed home more often, running the business, caring for the children, holding everything together. On TV, it looked like a perfect antique fairy tale. In reality, they were two people slowly pulling in different directions, stretched by fame, distance, pressure, expectations, and choices that would soon break the life they had spent almost 2 decades building. And the moment those cracks finally split open, everything that looked beautiful from the outside came crashing down. By 2015, the pressure behind the scenes had finally caught up with Drew. The long filming days, constant travel, and growing distance at home created a space he should have never stepped into, but he did. What started as quiet conversations at antique fairs with Amanda Thomas, the wife of his friend Janice, slowly crossed a line. The relationship didn't stay hidden. Messages kept going back and forth, even after attempts to end it, and soon other women began contacting Amanda, claiming they had been involved with Drew too. When the truth surfaced in 2017, it detonated everything at once. The antiques community is small, and news moves faster than any TV edit or PR spin. What shocked people wasn't just the affair itself, but who it involved. A close friend, a marriage, a circle of dealers who all knew each other. The kind of betrayal that doesn't stay quiet in a town as tight-knit as Conwy. The breaking point came that same year at the Liverpool Arms, a local pub where Drew had been drinking for decades. Janice confronted him after receiving a text that pushed him over the edge. Words were exchanged, tempers snapped, and one punch sent Drew to the floor. Glasses shattered. The place erupted. It wasn't a glamorous scandal, it was messy, personal, and painfully public. When the case went to court, Janice was fined, but Drew didn't escape the consequences. He was banned under the local pub watch scheme from dozens of pubs in and around Conwy. For a man who spent his life in those communities, a ban like that was more humiliating than the punch. The fallout didn't stop there. Viewers began forming strong, unforgiving opinions. Some called him arrogant. Others said he had finally been exposed. Longtime fans were split, and locals, people who had known him since he was the kid dragging scrap down the street, spoke openly about feeling let down. Even people who had admired his eye for treasure started questioning his character. Inside his home, things were even worse. After nearly 2 decades of marriage, the trust between Drew and Rebecca finally collapsed. The affair didn't just damage their relationship, it ended it. Court papers cited irreconcilable differences, but the story was already public long before any judge made it official. This wasn't a storyline for TV. It wasn't a dramatized episode. It was real life clawing back at him hard. And the part that hurt most wasn't the punch, or the ban, or even the headlines. It was knowing that the family foundation he'd built for almost 20 years was about to disappear, and nothing he salvaged from the past could fix what he had broken in the present. When the marriage finally ended in 2017, it didn't feel like a clean break. It felt like a slow dismantling of a life Drew once believed was unshakable. After nearly 20 years together, Drew and Rebecca had to pull apart everything they had built: business, home, belongings, memories, routines. The chapel they bought young and restored piece by piece wasn't just a structure, it was the timeline of their entire relationship. Every stained glass panel, every reclaimed beam, every antique they had hunted together had become part of their story. Now it all had to be divided. The financial split was significant. The chapel alone was worth a small fortune by then, and Rebecca secured a large share of the assets to keep stability for their 2 children. The shop, the stock, the investments, everything was suddenly under review. Drew wasn't broke, far from it, but the breakup carved away pieces of both his personal and professional world. A family that used to travel Europe together, sourcing antiques, now lived in separate homes, separate rhythms, separate futures. After the divorce, Drew left North Wales and relocated to Bath, searching for a fresh start in a city that didn't carry whispers of the past. He bought an impressive Georgian townhouse, grand, historic, full of potential. But the irony was painful. The man known for restoring other people's forgotten treasures now struggled to restore his own home. The moment he began renovations, the walls revealed rot. Beams failed inspection. Plumbing had to be ripped out. Electrical work became a nightmare. Costs spiraled fast. A project he believed he could finish, with confidence turned into a bottomless pit. More than £100,000 disappeared into repairs he never planned for. Rooms remained unfinished. Floors stayed bare. Whole sections of the house sat untouched as bills piled up. And for the first time in decades, Drew wasn't expanding, he was retreating. The contrast was brutal. He had once walked into derelict chapels, crumbling mills, abandoned pubs, and turned them into profit. But this time, the building didn't cooperate. This time, his life wasn't moving upward, it was slowing down. Fans noticed him appearing less and less on screen. Old clients saw a quieter man behind the counter. Friends said he seemed exhausted. Older, more private. The whirlwind pace of fame and picking had stopped, and he was left standing in a half-renovated home that felt nothing like the chapel he had once shared with his family. And just as he tried to catch his breath, something else shifted. The public image he worked for years to polish began slipping out of his hands. As Drew's personal life fell apart, something else unraveled alongside it: his public image. For years, viewers had seen him as the charismatic expert with a quick wit and a sharper eye. But after the scandal broke, people started looking at him differently, and the comments became louder and harsher. Some longtime fans felt betrayed. Some casual viewers suddenly became critics. And people who had worked around him or simply lived near Conwy didn't hold back at all. Others went further, accusing him of lowballing, manipulating deals, or taking advantage of people who didn't understand the value of what they had. A few commented that he wouldn't be missed at all. Locals were even sharper. Some said they never wanted him back in Conwy. Others brought up stories about how he'd fallen out with neighbors, clashed with people behind the scenes, or behaved in ways that left a bitter taste. His pub ban only added fuel to the fire. To many, it wasn't just a punishment, it was proof that the polite TV persona didn't match the real man. Then came the accusations about legality. People questioned whether some of the items he pulled from old chapels and abandoned buildings were truly salvaged or simply taken. Comments rolled in saying things like, "In the UK, that's called theft," or wondering why a TV show would celebrate someone walking into derelict sites without every detail explained. Whether those claims were fair or exaggerated didn't matter, the doubt had already spread, and the backlash didn't stop at his character, and that wave of resentment didn't just shape his image, it shaped his next move. By the early 2020, Drew wasn't just fighting public opinion, he was running out of energy to keep fighting at all. The man who once traveled thousands of miles a year chasing forgotten treasures now seemed tired of being seen, tired of being judged, and tired of carrying the weight of a brand that no longer felt like his. The first major sign came quietly. He shut down his Conwy shop. This wasn't just a workplace. It had become a tourist stop. Fans traveled from all over the country hoping to meet him, buy a piece with a story, or take photos outside the building they'd seen on screen. For years, that shop symbolized the heart of his business, part showroom, part workshop, part museum of his life's work. But after the scandal, the divorce, the pub bans, and the non-stop whispering about his personal life, Drew seemed done with being a public attraction. He didn't make a big announcement. He didn't give an emotional farewell. He simply closed the doors and asked people not to visit anymore. For many fans, it felt abrupt. For Drew, it was probably necessary. Then came the second, much bigger shift. He stepped away from Salvage Hunters. After more than 200 episodes, countless road trips, hundreds of deals, and over a decade of letting cameras into his life, he quietly announced he was finished. No dramatic final episode. No farewell tour. Just a brief statement about exhaustion, privacy, and wanting a life that didn't revolve around filming schedules and public scrutiny. And if you look closely, the reasons make sense. He had been carrying personal turmoil while still expected to smile on camera. His marriage had collapsed under the pressure. His hometown relationships had fractured. His reputation had been dragged through headlines and comment sections. Even his own home renovation, a project meant to be a fresh start, had turned into a financial and emotional drain. Walking away wasn't quitting. It was survival. Without the show, without the shop, and without the constant cycle of filming, negotiating, traveling, and defending himself, Drew suddenly found something he had in years: quiet. But that silence came with a cost. He wasn't the face of a global show anymore. He wasn't the charismatic dealer on television every week. He wasn't the center of attention at fairs and auctions. And for a man who built a career on movement and noise, standing still for the first time in decades was unfamiliar and uncomfortable. And just when it seemed like he might settle into that quieter life, he made a decision that shocked even the people who had followed him for years. A decision that looked less like business and more like a man letting go of an entire chapter of himself. In 2024, Drew did something that people close to him never imagined he would do. He walked into an auction room and placed more than 600 of his most personal pieces up for sale. These weren't leftovers from a warehouse or random bits of stock he no longer needed. They were the items he kept through every move, every shop change, every chapter of his life, the pieces he chose to live with, not just sell. As the auction began, it felt less like a business event and more like a slow unraveling of the man he used to be. One by one, the objects that shaped his identity left his hands. A 1930 fairground boat that he had once treated like a family heirloom, gone. Industrial lamps he had chased across Europe long before television ever came calling, gone. Architectural finds linked to designers, collectors, and historic projects, including the Bluebird-related piece that once made him beam with pride, gone. By the time the final lot sold, the total had passed £800,000. But the money didn't tell the story. The expression on his face did. For most of his life, Drew defined himself by what he discovered, restored, and protected. Each item held a memory of where he found it, who he met, what he risked, or what it meant. Watching strangers lift those memories off the tables wasn't exciting or triumphant, it looked like grief. People who knew him said he referred to many of those objects as old friends. And as the auctioneer called out the numbers, it felt as though he was saying goodbye to every version of himself he had built over the last 30 years. Some viewers saw the sale as downsizing, others thought it was a business reset. But anyone who followed his journey understood the truth. People don't sell this many personal belongings unless something inside them has shifted. This wasn't a liquidation of antiques, it was a release of weight. Letting go of the parts of his life that no longer fit the man he had become after the scandals, the divorce, the bans, the public criticism, the closed shop, and the quiet exit from television. When the final hammer fell, he didn't rush out to rebuild his collection. He didn't announce a comeback or a new chapter. He didn't chase another deal. He simply stepped back from the noise, as if the auction had emptied not just his storage, but the pressure he'd carried for years. It was the first visible moment where he allowed the past to leave him, instead of trying to hold it together piece by piece. And what came after that auction wasn't fame or spotlight. It was something far more unfamiliar to him: stillness. After the auction dust settled, Drew didn't jump into a new show, open a new shop, or try to rebuild the public image he once relied on. Instead, he did something completely out of character for a man who spent decades chasing movement. He slowed down. Today, he works on a far smaller scale, choosing pieces carefully instead of hunting endlessly for the next big find. The pace that once defined his life has shifted into something quieter, more deliberate, and far more private. His base of work moved as well. Instead of the old Conway showroom that fans recognized from television, Drew now focuses on a more curated space in the Cotswolds, where he can work without crowds or constant attention. It is less of a public attraction and more of a workshop, a place where he can restore objects without the pressure of performing for viewers. No cameras, no producers. just the craft he started with long before any fame touched his life. The same thing is happening at home. The Georgian townhouse in Bath, once a stressful renovation project, has slowly been turning into a livable space, room by room. It isn't a showpiece. It isn't a magazine-ready restoration. It's simply becoming a home. Drew spends more time on careful repairs, finishing details, and small restorations that he never rushed through. The work moves at a human pace now, not a television schedule. He still deals, still restores, and still buys and sells, but the scale has changed. Instead of traveling across Europe for massive hauls, he focuses on precise finds, pieces that interest him, not pieces he needs to keep a show alive. Designers still contact him, collectors still know his name. But the volume is lower, the noise is quieter, and the decisions are made for himself, not an audience. For the first time in years, he isn't chasing episodes, deadlines, or the next headline. He is rebuilding his life the same way he has always restored old objects, slowly, carefully, and with a steady hand. There's no big comeback story, no splashy announcement, no new season coming soon. Just a man who once lived in constant motion choosing, finally, to move at his own speed. And that shift, quiet, steady, almost invisible, is the clearest sign of how much his life has changed since the world last saw him on screen. When people look at Drew Pritchard's story, they tend to split into two groups. Some see a man who lost almost everything he built: his marriage, his reputation, his hometown support, his show, and finally, the personal treasures he spent decades collecting. Others see none of that as tragedy at all. They see a man who made choices, lived with the fallout, and ended up exactly where those choices were always going to lead. And the truth sits somewhere between the two. There was no dramatic collapse, no final moment where everything came crashing down in a single day. What happened to Drew was quieter and far more human. His life didn't fall apart overnight, it eroded slowly. A decision here, a mistake there, a moment of pride, a lapse in judgment, a relationship that slipped out of reach, a community that no longer felt like home. By the time he walked into that 2024 auction, the dismantling had already happened. The sale simply made it visible. Calling it heartbreaking isn't about inventing tragedy where there is none. It's about recognizing the emotional weight of watching a man who built his identity from nothing slowly let go of each part of that identity. You don't abandon a shop you loved unless you're tired. You don't walk away from a hit TV show unless you're drained. You don't sell 600 personal pieces unless you're trying to free yourself from a past that became too heavy to carry. But calling it karma isn't wrong either. Drew was at the center of scandals, betrayals, and decisions that pushed people away. The consequences weren't random, they were earned. And many viewers felt no sympathy, arguing that his downfall was simply the natural result of years of ego, shortcuts, and misjudgments. The comments about arrogance and entitlement didn't appear out of nowhere. The punch in the pub didn't come from a stranger. The public resentment didn't build overnight. What makes his story compelling is that both sides are true. He created his success with his own hands, and he damaged parts of his life with those same hands. He built a brand that changed his industry, and he struggled to separate the brand from the man. He found treasure everywhere he looked except in the places that mattered most. Whether that feels heartbreaking or deserved depends entirely on how you see him. But one thing is certain, his story isn't about antiques. It's about a man learning what stays, what leaves, and what cannot be salvaged once it's broken. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe for more. Do you think Drew can ever rebuild his reputation? And was selling his entire collection a fresh start or a final goodbye?